Welcome to the video tutorial for the Ferring trousers. So I'm going to start with the pockets. Now this is my trouser fronts and I've marked on all my notches, and this is my pocket facing. I've cut mine out of a calico because I don't want them to stretch across my tummy. You can use the same fabric as your outer if you choose to. It's just my preference to be using a cotton that doesn't stretch for this, and a thinner fabric as well, just so it's less bulk across my tummy too. So right sides together, pin these fabrics, and we're going to stitch 1 centimetre along this line here. So back tack to start, centimetre seam allowance as usual unless otherwise indicated, and then back tack to finish. There we go, that's the first seam. So that seam allowance I'm going to leave underneath the pocket bag, and I'm going to stitch through all those layers. I've given it a press first, so I'm stitching on the pocket bag side and I'm stitching the seam allowance to that pocket bag just to hold it all down. There we are. Obviously I've used a contrasting colour and everything to try and make it show up for you. You might want to use a colour that's more suitable for your trousers. There we go, giving it a quick press. That's the first bit done. Oh, bit floofy. That gives us a nice crisp edge to our pocket. So now I've got this facing that I'm going to use. Because I'm using the calico, I've got my pocket bag here, and I'm going to put this facing on top that I've cut from the actual fabric, so that from the outside of the trousers it will look like it's all the same outer fabric, and you won't know it's got the pocketing or the calico on the inside. So I've overlocked that raw edge on the diagonal. You could tuck it in if you want, but I don't want any bulk or any lines to show through. Then you line up this piece of fabric with your pocket bag, and I'm just going to stitch it down within the centimetre seam allowance to the calico. Obviously, if you're not using a different fabric, if you're using the same fabric for your pockets as you are for your trousers, you can skip this step and just cut the pocket bags out of the same fabric. That's absolutely fine. This is just my personal choice. Here we go, that's all stitched down, so that can just be treated as one piece now. So if I lay the front trouser on top, you'll see that all you can see is the denim fabric. That's all hidden inside the pocket. So now I'm going to line up the wavy edges and I'm going to stitch those down. So I'm just stitching the calico pieces or the pocket bags together here. All the way around, using my centimetre seam allowance again. There we go, that's them together. So I'm going to just neaten this edge with an overlock. There we go, so that's the bag sealed and neatened. Now I just need to lay it all on and stay stitch within the seam allowance through all those layers, just so that it all becomes sort of one piece. Stitch through all the layers. Here we go. So once this is stitched, you should just have one nice neat piece all together with your pocket in it there. There we go. Next I'm going to stitch the back darts. So here's my back trouser pattern. You need to cut a pair. There are again notches here. I've marked them in a contrasting pen along with my dart so that I don't get confused which size I'm doing. And I'm going to poke a pin through. You can see I've notched the top there with little snips. You could use chalk or tailor tacks. So I've marked that point with a pin and I'm going to transfer it to the insides now. Okay, so I'm lining up the notches at the top and I'm marking that point of the dart with the pin. I'm going to start at the broad end of the dart, back tack to start and taper off towards the pin. Oh yeah, nice soft tapering off so it's not pointy at the end or puckered. And I'm going to press that dart towards the centre back seam. There we go. One dart. Next we're going to do the side seam and the inside leg seam. So here's my front trouser, you can see the pocket there. I've marked my notches on, you can see I've overlocked the crotch, the side seam and the inside leg. So I've used chalk to transfer those notches so that you can see, for the benefit of the camera, they show up really nicely, don't they? Okay, so right sides together, I've got a back leg and a front leg. Start from the waist and pin downwards. And then start from the crotch and the inside leg and pin down. And we're going to stitch in that same direction as well. Centimetre seam allowance, back tack from the top down and from the crotch down. There we go, 2 seams. So now I'm just going to press these open. There you go, nicely pressed seam. And the other side. So we just turn that through. That's it, one trouser leg. So now we're going to stitch the crotch seam. So I've got one leg the right way out and I've got one inside out. I'm going to put the one that's right side out inside the one that's the wrong way out. Matching that seam, put a pin in there. And then matching notches and starting at the waist, matching those raw edges. Pop some pins in. Now when it comes to the front, you only want to go so far. So the best way to do it is to grab your fly facing and start pinning from the bottom of the fly facing. So if you line your fly facing up on your trouser just quickly, you can see where you need to stitch to and from. So you've got the correct size opening for your size trouser. So back tack all the way around and back tack to finish. It's sometimes prudent to double stitch a crotch, but that's entirely up to you. So using my centimetre seam allowance, taking my time as it's round a curve. Popping those trouser legs together. There we go. Take the pins out. And we can turn them through. So there's your opening for your fly. It's a centre back seam. I'm just going to open that up and give it a press. So there you go, I've just pressed mine open. You can press it to one side and top stitch it for a little bit more safety if you need to. Okay, so let's start this fly front. These are the pieces you're going to need for your fly. You've got your fly guard and you've got your fly facing and a zip. So this is my fly guard. And I've just got one piece of fabric here that folded, and I'm just going to overlock these two edges. You could bag the bottom out, but personally I don't want any bulk around my crotch if I can help it. So I've just overlocked those edges, and now I'm simply stitching the zip to that fly guard. I'll show you in a mo, it will all become clear. There we go. So that's my fly guard. And as you can see, I've just stitched that zip down on the far right in the seam allowance. Now, let's get my trousers. There we go. So I'm going to stitch right sides together with the zip sort of sandwiched in the middle. The fly guard goes on the left hand side. The right hand side as you're looking at it, but the left hand side as you're wearing. And I'm going to stitch through all those layers by the side of my zip. I'm using a zip foot now, so I'm getting in not like super close to the zip, because you want to be able to zip it up and down, but fairly snugly. Going to unzip the zip so that I don't have a bump in it. Just secure it. There we go. So you can see I've stitched down there, and if I open it up, look, you can already see it's starting to look like a fly. So I'm going to just top stitch this fabric back. So through all the layers I'm stitching it to the seam allowance so that it lies flat. Move that zip pull out the way again. There we go. Okay, so that's your zip in and your fly guard. So now we're going to add our fly facing. So right sides together, you can see I've interfaced this, and I'm going to stitch with my centimetre seam allowance from the top down, and then I'm going to fold the facing over the seam allowance and understitch. There we go. So that's understitched. Fold that back. I'm going to give that a press. It's definitely worth pressing at every stage here, because you'll never be able to press these pieces independently again once they're all together. So I'm lining that fold up with the stitch line that I top stitched my zip on the other side, and I'm just pinning down there. I'll stitch that crotch seam up a little bit more in a minute. Let's concentrate on just doing this first. So then I peel back the fly guard and I pin the zip tape to the fly facing. Let's put another pin in there. That's not secure. There we go. I could feel that moving. Let's secure it there so that we don't see the zip when we've finished sewing our fly. We want it all enclosed. So there we go. So I'm going to be pinning this zip tape to the fly facing. And at this point, I'd recommend anyone sort of beginnerish or not terribly confident, do tack it, do hand sew this down and check that it's all in line before you machine it. It's worth doing that little step. So I'm taking these other pins out and I'm just going to unzip, and I'm going to stitch the tape down to the fly facing. So there we go, that's the zip tape I've sewn down. I've sewn it right on the edge and then closer into the zip, but not too close. And now I'm just going to put it over there and make sure that it all lines up. Yep, beautiful. And then you want to stitch the facing to the trousers. So I'm going to start at the top of the waist and I'm going to stitch down. I will be able to feel it through the trousers, but you might want to trace the line from your pattern. And I'm going to just stitch part of the curve. I'm not going to go all the way around it. So you'll see in a minute that I will stop just before I go completely around the little curve at the bottom. So do draw this on with chalk or something if you're unsure, because it will look much smarter if it's accurate. There we go. So you can see I've gone part way around my curve, but I've left that little bit there because I'm going to now grab all of the layers. So I've got my fly guard, my fly facing, my zip tape, everything in there. And I'm just going to stitch that last little bit through all of those layers so that when you open your zip, the fly guard does its job and is sitting behind the zip. Okay. Some people put a bar tack here to sort of secure it. I'm just going to do an ordinary stitch. So there we go, that's how mine looks. Lots of different ways to do this, obviously, and you'll see on other tutorials I do things different ways just for variety. So next we're going to prep this waistband. Now, it's a curved waistband, so you need to make sure you've got a pair of everything. These are my centre backs. I've got one interfaced and one not interfaced, and you need to do the same for your right side front and your left side front. Make sure you've got the same pieces interfaced. So you want your under waistband to be interfaced and the top waistband to not be interfaced. Okay, so I'm putting together my side seams, and again just beware that the side seams are not on the grain but the centre front is, so make sure you get the sides together for each piece, not the fronts. So that's my under waistband pinned. I'm going to do the top one. Okay, so centimetre seam allowance on both of those. There we go. You'll see that they curve slightly, so you know you've got your pieces on correctly. I'm going to press those seams open. So convex curve goes to the trousers, concave curve is the bit we're going to stitch next, which is your waistline. So pin the two waistbands together, matching your side seams on that curve. centre backs together and front. So I'm going to stitch the short end and the long end. I've started stitching 1 centimetre up from the bottom, and I've done a little 1 stitch on the cross there so that you can see that's the seam allowance, and 1 stitch going across so that it's easier to turn out. You get a much better corner when you turn through, so it's just that little bit more space for all the fabric. So grade down your under waistband, the one with the interfacing, all the way around. Clip your seam allowances, and you're going to stitch through the seam allowance and the interfaced waistband all through to understitch. Here we go. So that seam allowance is underneath, I've pressed it before I've done it, so it lies flat under the interfacing side of the waistband. There we go, and I just stitched it on the edge so that it will fold nicely. Let's push that through. Just trim that down a little bit more. Okay, nice corners. So now I'm going to fold that in half and I'm going to give it a press. And there we go, 1 waistband ready to go on. So next we're going to attach the waistband to the trousers. So here are my trousers with my lovely fly front. Here's my waistband, and you can see now the edge stitch side is the inside, which is the bit with the interfacing on. So I'm going to attach, you can see I've overlocked that edge on the interfacing side. You're going to pin the non-interfaced side of your waistband to your trousers, and this is where leaving that centimetre seam allowance free when you stitched around the top of the waistband will help. Just easier to get in there and pin it. Matching side seams, make sure they're lined up, work your way around, pinning the waist to the top of the trousers. Okay, so there's a little notch there that should match your dart. And then I've clipped the centre back so that it matches the seam. Another notch to the dart there. Side seams again. And there should be a notch here that matches the zip. So a couple more pins, and I'm going to stitch from one side, back tack to start, centimetre seam allowance all the way to the other end. Here we go, back tack to start, matching those raw edges. Keep that seam allowance as even as possible all the way around so you get a nice even waistband. There we go, take the pins out. Next job is to press that seam allowance up into the waistband. And there we go. And then I'm going to fold down the inside waistband and pin. Again at those key points. Matching those side seams. Making sure it's all lying flat. Tuck up those raw edges at the ends. Smoothing out your waistband as you go so that it's all flat. There we go. So now I'm going to stitch from the right side and I'm going to stitch in the ditch. So this little gap here, just below the waistband, where the waistband is sewn to the trousers, is where I'm going to be aiming for. If you're not so confident to be able to get in that ditch, you can always stitch just on the edge of the waistband and do a nice little fancy top stitch or something. It'll look equally as nice. There we go, taking out those pins. There's my waistband. That's looking rather smart. Lovely job. Okay, we're nearly finished. We've got the hems to do next. Now I chose to put quite a deep hem on these because I think they just hang so much nicer if they're a wider leg, if they've got a deeper hem. So I've marked with chalk where my hem's going to be, where the fold is going to be. So I'm going to press that up and then I'm going to press my centimetre seam allowance as well so that I've got a nice deep hem. There we go, all nicely pressed before I start. Makes it so much easier to get it even and flat if you press it first. I'm just going to whiz round with the sewing machine now. So there we go, it's a nice hem, just needs a press. That adds a little bit of weight being heavier and hang nicely. So I've chosen hook and bar closure for this. You could do a button and buttonhole if you choose. I've got these little hooks and bars, trouser hooks, and I'm going to use 2 of them because it just sort of spreads the tension a little bit. Not everyone will have as much tension on their belly as me, but so I'm just going to put them next to each other like that, hand stitch them on. So there you go, there's 2 little hooks, 2 little bars. Let's do the fly up, do our hooks and bars up. Lovely. So hopefully you've got a pair of trousers that looks something like this. Enjoy.